Hello. We're all here. This is so exciting. My name is David Pierce. I'm Protocols Editor at Large, and we're here to talk Epic versus Apple. So let's just jump in. So I'm going to make all of you just quickly introduce yourselves, and we'll do it in order of being on the screen here. So we're going to go Nick, then Kareen, then Ben. Let's do this.
Hi, this is Nick Stat, Protocols video game reporter.
I'm Kareen Levy. I'm Protocol's West Coast editor.
And Ben's muted. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Can't take Ben anywhere. All right, well, we're gonna get Ben back. But let's just go back to the beginning, and then Ben can join, whenever he figures out how technology works. We just had, what, Nick, was it 16 days of trial? Was that the final number here?
I believe it was 15 or 16, but honestly, I guess I really don't know because my head is just a complete fog after all.
Yeah,
the
I
hours
worried
of
about
testimony.
you.
It's at least 15. At least 15.
Okay. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. And for anybody who didn't just spend 15 days listening to a trial over the phone, just give us like the quick 60-second recap of how we got to this trial, just to sort of level set before we get into the weeds of it.
For sure. So last August, Epic Games, the maker of Fortnite, they updated their game on iOS with a hotfix. So Apple did not approve this update, and it added a alternative payment system for Fortnite, meaning you could pay for Fortnite V-Bucks, their in-game currency, without giving Apple 30% of the money. Epic knew this was against the rules, and Apple kicked them off promptly, and they responded with an antitrust lawsuit, a pretty far-reaching, very massive antitrust lawsuit. So this has been about 9 months in the making, but the issues at the heart of this have been going back years, and they're at the center of Apple's relationship with its developers, some of whom, the big ones, are not very pleased with Apple. And we saw this play out over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, it really kind of opened the floodgates a year ago, that it was like everybody had been, like, I think we all as reporters in this space had sort of heard stories about people not liking dealing with Apple, but Apple's very big and very powerful. And so there wasn't a lot of discussions happening. And Epic was the one who just like blew the doors off. And it felt like all of a sudden the whole conversation changed, which I guess was kind of the goal from the beginning.
Right. I think, for a long time, it felt like it was big corporations don't like Apple, the other big corporation. And that's not to say that Epic isn't a big corporation, but they were the first video game company really to come out this forcefully against Apple and to really come for the heart of the App Store, which is the 30% cut and all of the restrictions that Apple puts in the App Store to kind of prevent anyone from getting around that unless they specifically exempt you from it. But video game makers are not exempt. They never have been for the existence of the App Store. And Epic Games was the first company really to kind of put its foot down and say, we want to challenge this.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was a big moment.
Ben's here.
I'm here. I'm Ben Brody. I am on the tech policy team, and in fact, I'm on the policy team because I don't know how tech works. It was a big moment, though. Nick's absolutely right.
Yeah, can you actually explain why? Because I think part of what, and this is going to get into like the actual mechanics of the trial, but it felt like a big part of why everyone knew this trial was going to be significant was that like it was going to set terms for how we talk about a lot of this stuff and how antitrust works in tech and what monopolies are and what counts as a market. And like, even going into this, what was your sense of sort of why this was going to be such a big moment?
I think we've had this moment of complaints about all of those other big companies, about some of the small companies that might whisper to us anonymously that they really had all these problems. But you're exactly right. Not only the fact that this lawsuit was kind of such a blockbuster and had all this PR and all this campaign behind it, but also the fact that it went to trial so quickly. And all of a sudden, we actually had evidence and we actually had experts discussing, judges asking questions about all of these issues that we've sort of been debating theoretically in the press, in the policy community for years now. And now there's actually going to be a decision on all of these things on marketplaces and how much you can police them and what kinds of lock-in makes for a market and all these kinds of things that nerdy antitrust people like me sort of spend a lot of their time with. And it's kind of an exciting moment. We don't get a lot of these kinds of trials or decisions.
That's fair. I feel like there's going to be a decision, might be like a slightly bold claim for what we're about to get out of this. But we'll get to all that in a minute. I want to talk about the video game thing, because I think the weirdest part of this whole trial to me was this question of what is a video game, and just the sheer amount of time spent to this question of what counts as a video game is just mind blowing to me. Kareen's dog agrees with me.
They're very interested in antitrust.
So, Kareen, what do you make of this? Why did we just spend so much of the last 3 weeks arguing about what is and is not a video game, and what the hell does it matter? And did we actually learn anything at all?
I don't think that we really learned anything at all about what makes or doesn't make a video game. But I think like it was very important to Apple in order to like lay out the groundwork of like what is their market, right? So then if like this, what is a video game and what isn't a video game, like how do you define that, and then how do you define the market? Like if we wanted to define the market as like the entire gaming landscape, or if we want to define the market as just like iOS app distribution, like then it just like that kind of like falls into there. But I don't think we learned what a video game was. Do you think we did?
I don't feel like we did either. I know experiences are a thing, and I know Roblox exists, and I feel like beyond that, I don't know that I learned anything. Did either of you learn any more?
So I think there, for me, I think there was a lot of undercurrent of Epic complaining. Like Epic has always had this idea that Apple mistreats game developers, but not just Apple, but that like middlemen mistreat game developers. Epic's CEO Tim Sweeney has always looked at creators as like the lifeblood of games and of software and services, and he thinks that people like companies like Apple are just kind of taking money off the top just for rent seeking essentially. And so I think this idea that like Fortnite is more than just a game to him is this idea that it can have a whole universe unto itself that can have all of its own commerce, and that the idea that another company would come along and take some of that money just because they can, I think that just kind of infuriates the people at Epic.
Yeah, I mean, and it feels like Apple kind of shot itself in the foot on that one a little bit. That even, especially because as we got to the end of the trial, there seemed to be a shift, and this is, I guess, Tim Cook's fault to some extent, that it shifted from we're just in this to help all developers be better people and reach their customers, to like, yeah, they make a lot of money, we want some of it. Which I feel like that was a shift that didn't seem like it was going to happen, but it kind of felt like we got there at the end.
I mean, that was like the subtext of the entire trial, right? Is that everybody's making so much money and we want a piece of it. And that's why everybody's so upset about the 30%. Like nobody understands, where that's coming from. And then he said the quiet part loud.
Right.
There were a lot of things said at the end there that I don't think Apple would exactly want to appear in promotional materials or presentations to shareholders. And I sort of wonder if they're going to come back and bite them in the butt a little bit. But I at least for the tactics of the trial, it does make sense that they went there. But it seems like it's a bit of a gamble to me. I'd love to be the lawyer or be a fly in the wall when the lawyer suggested, like, yeah, let's just throw Max under the bus. Like that's how we're going to do this. Okay.
Yeah, wait. Let's talk about this, because this to me was the single most surprising thing about this entire trial. Like, I've covered Apple for a long time, and I have never once heard a person who works for Apple say a negative thing about an Apple product. Like, you could ask them about like the Newton, and they'd be like, gosh, we had so many great ideas. We're really proud of it. We really feel like we executed well on it. And it's like, you sold 11 of them and then it died. Nobody cared. But this was one, and I guess to some extent you're right, Ben, that this was just a tactical decision to say the iPhone is very important, and if it costs us some goodwill on the Mac, like, so be it. Like, was that all it is? That's what it felt like to me.
I have to think that was the plan there. I mean, they're making this privacy and security argument, right? They're saying that they have to curate the App Store really, really carefully because of, scam apps and scuzzy content and all this kind of thing. And they made a sort of sophisticated argument about why the iPhone is a bigger attack surface. There are more of them out there with like more sensitive data, your location data, your health data, whatever you want to call that. So they made an argument for it, but it just seemed like it went so far against, like you're saying, like Apple culture and this sort of Apple's brand is so important to Apple. Why were they going out there and kind of digging on it? And I guess it was mostly to enter facts for the judge, but it seemed pretty strange for those of us watching the company.
I kind of liked that part, actually. I thought that was like, it was so strategic. Like, we know how Apple is. We know their culture. We know they never, talk badly or poorly about any of their stuff. And then they like threw Macs under the bus, like in order to bolster their argument for the iPhone. Like, I think that's like, I couldn't have written that better for a TV show. But I thought that was like a brilliant way of saying, like, look, like, here is how important security is for us on the iPhone, and we know it's not working on the Mac because the Mac is open, because like you can download whatever crappy stuff you want onto it, and we know that, and it's still our product, and like now we want to keep the iPhone safe.
Nick, what did you make of that?
Yeah, I thought that, in my mind, it was really just a reiteration of how important the iPhone is to Apple, that they were willing to do that. I mean, they love to go on stage and say like they love all of their products equally, like children, and they don't have any preferential treatment. Like, we make the best headphones, we make the best this or that. But at the end of the day, the iPhone is the biggest business for Apple, and as we've seen in this trial and all of the documents that have come out, all of the financials that have come out of it, the iPhone is the biggest money maker, and having top-down control of it is just so vital to Apple that it's clear that they're willing to say some disparaging remarks about the Mac because they can afford to. They need the iPhone more.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And so, but to that point, actually, coming into this, the security argument seemed like it was going to be kind of the core part of Apple's defense, right? It's how they justify saying that the App Store is sort of inextricable from the rest of iOS and the rest of the iPhone. It's how they justify the 30% commission. It's how they justify the review process. Like, it's all about security and safety. Coming out of this, how do you guys feel like they did? Did that argument work? Did the judge seem to buy it? Did it feel like they made their case successfully? Nick, you go first.
So I feel like they did a pretty good job in that respect. They had a couple of points they kept hammering home. They kept bringing up itch.io, the poor indie game store, which I love and has lots of great stuff.
I know, rough couple of weeks for itch.
But I think that they kept holding that up as this idea of like, this is what the Wild West looks like. Like, there's pornographic content, there's offensive content, violence, and Epic tried to counter and say, look, your iPhone has a web browser. You can go find these things easily whenever you like. Even apps in the App Store, some of them have, sexually explicit content. There was a bunch of apps that were being brought up in the courtroom that had really funny names, and it was funny to hear lawyers say them in a court of record. But at the end of the day, I think Apple made a pretty powerful argument that, it's not necessarily that all these terrible things will happen, it's that they could happen, and that Apple doesn't want to take that chance. And I did find that pretty convincing. I feel like the judge found that convincing too, because she did ask some pointed questions of Epic about, do you want to put the itch store on the App Store, or do you want to put that on the iPhone? And they kind of waffled there after being confronted with the porn scenario. They didn't really know how to respond to that. So I think the judge did find Apple's side a little more convincing.
Ben, what about you?
I think Nick's right. It seems like the judge did kind of respond to those things, and she did jump in with some of her same questions. These things are hard. We talk about competition sort of as its own thing. We talk about privacy as its own thing. But the fact is, there are overlaps here and there are tensions here. And I think those are pretty real. And Apple, I think, did a pretty good job of highlighting how real they are. One of the things that I'm going to be watching for in the decision is, I think Judge Gonzalez-Rogers, as Nick said, did think that it was pretty sympathetic. How much she's going to be able to rely on it in her decision, which is mostly focused on antitrust, on competition, is going to be something that I think is going to be really interesting, because there are some ways to bring it in, but they're not. It's not robust. It's a case that's about competition at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's fair. It does seem like there's a couple of things going on here, right? There's sort of a fight in the court of public opinion, and then there's this very narrow question about what happens in this specific case. Like, it feels like we're both fighting sort of a macro fight and a micro fight all at the same time in this case. And I have found it very hard to separate the two, even in Epic's case, where it's like they would bring up some stuff that it's like, this has nothing to do with what you're talking about in this particular case. You're clearly bringing it up for appeals, and to do this again the next time you want to pick this fight, it's just like, it just feels like there's 50 lawsuits all kind of overlapping inside of this one lawsuit. It made it very complicated to figure out. But Corinne, what did you make of that argument? Because I know coming into this, you were as sort of suspicious of Apple's idea that only Apple can protect people from themselves as I was. Do you leave the trial any less convinced?
That's a very hard question. I don't know. I'm always like rooting for the little guy, and like there was no little guy in this trial, because they were both huge companies that were making zillions of dollars every year. But I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know what, like, how I left the trial. Like, I don't know. I don't think I take it back. I think Apple did do a very good job. Like, I think Apple kind of proved its case a little bit better than Epic did. And but I don't know. I'm still torn. I feel like I need to read like 10 more stories about about what happened during the trial to really like let it sink in.
That's fair. So, and let's talk about the decision, because I think the big question now is sort of what happens with this case, and then kind of what happens in the broader space. And Ben, I'm curious from your perspective. I think, like, I came into this thinking probably more about sort of the tech industry side of this than is going to turn out to be useful. Like, fundamentally, this is going to be a case about markets and about antitrust and about how we define these very narrow things. And I feel like we got pretty strong hints in the last 2 days of the trial about what Judge Gonzalez-Rogers is thinking. So, like, as we stand, you know, we could be days, weeks, months before we get a decision. Where do you feel like sort of the winds are blowing right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I agree. I think she's really kind of skeptical about Epic's market definition of Apple as this way of distributing mobile apps, which may be how a lot of us users think about it, but in strictly economic terms, she thought that Epic had kind of set up a tautology that basically the Apple is a monopoly. Apple is a monopoly because the relevant market is everything that Apple controls. She seems really deeply skeptical about that. It is theoretically plausible kind of under antitrust law. These things do exist. But the last case on it, I think, is like 30 years old. It literally involves Kodak copiers. It's a little weird, and she seemed to think that going down that road was a problem. At the same time, when she was talking to Tim Cook, she kept saying, you have market power. You don't experience competition. You don't experience pricing pressure. Nothing in the market is disciplining you. So I think that she may find a way around some of those arguments by saying that there's market power in there, there are anti-competitive effects. I think, on the other hand, she did really lean into the anti-steering provision, this way that Apple stops apps from getting around their 30% cut. She asked multiple times throughout the trial, sometimes multiple times a day, what would be wrong with telling consumers that they can get around this thing? They can just go order online through a browser. So she needs to square those things. And in some ways, antitrust law is very defendant friendly. And so it might be hard if she believes Apple on the market definition, but Epic on the anti-steering provision. It might be a little hard to knit them together, but I suspect that might be where she is kind of going. But ultimately, we'll see what she thinks she can actually square between the facts, the law, the precedent, and then the fact that this will be appealed almost no matter what.
Corinne, you're nodding like you agree.
Yeah, I keep going back to the three, or the two main definitions of like what the market is, and then like her third definition, which, what if she just defines it as like mobile gaming specifically, and that made the Apple lawyer very sad, he said. So I think, like,
an amazing thing to say in court.
I loved that quote. So I think it'll just be interesting. Like, will there be a third, is there a third way? Is there, and if there is, then who wins? Like, if it is mobile gaming, like, then that's kind of like splits it in half. Then maybe, then that's not really a monopoly. But, the anti-steering provisions could still stand. So I'm so curious to see like where she's headed. It didn't seem like, anybody really knew at the end.
Yeah. Nick, I know you and I talked a few days ago, and we both kind of thought the anti-steering provision seemed to be the place that would be the easiest one to sort of make a change that might have some chance of making both sides quasi happy. Do you still feel that way coming out of the trial?
Yeah, I do. I mean, we heard effectively what are closing arguments yesterday, and there was a lot of time spent on, Epic went to great lengths to kind of make their big argument, which is that we should crack open the iPhone to, just put alternative app stores on there. We need more competition on the iPhone. Apple painted this as like an apocalyptic scenario. And then when it got to the anti-steering stuff, everything kind of toned down a little bit and it got a little bit more nuanced, and everyone was very confused for a little while about what the anti-steering rules actually are, because they're really complicated. And people were pulling up the App Store guidelines in court and reading them off because nobody, there's so many different categories and exemptions and things like that. But yeah, I think at the end of the day that Apple telling developers that they cannot advertise alternative payment options inside of, not just inside of the store listing, but inside of the app itself, I think that was something she found suspicious, and she found that Apple does not face a lot of competition when it comes to treating developers more fairly. When this idea that they could raise the commission and nobody could do anything about it, that was something I think she found interesting, because Apple has never done that before. They've never raised their commission. They haven't really lowered it except for very small developers and except for very specific use cases either. But
and she made the point that was in part in response to litigation like this,
right? Not competition.
Apple has done better not because of competition, but because of the threat of something else, which felt meaningful.
Right, and I mean Tim Cook and Phil Schiller both agreed on that point. They said it was in the back of their minds, which was just an amazing quote to hear them say that, like, regulatory pressure is in the back of their minds instead of, I guess, in the front of their minds. But yeah, I think that is a very narrow thing that could appease Epic and kind of keep Apple's control of the iPhone. But it's also, in-app purchases for games are the biggest business on the App Store. So I think Apple is also very afraid that, if more developers think they can get their consumers to go put their credit card details in on the web, that could deal a serious blow.
Yeah, is this something that everybody knew, by the way, that gaming was such a gigantic portion of the App Store business, and sort of as a result of the entire Apple services business, like just the amount of commission that Apple has taken from Fortnite, which I think Apple said was $100 million, but evidence says is something like $300 million, like blew my mind. Am I the only one who was surprised by this? Should I have seen this coming?
I think you should have seen it coming. I think like games are a big business, period. And so whether it's, a big business on the iPhone, or if it's a big business on Android, whatever, like, the games are a big business. In-app purchases are a big business. I didn't know it was a $300 million big business just from one game. But I think it was surprising that they said as much about it that they did, but I wasn't surprised that gaming was their bread and butter, if only because they just started with Apple Arcade, and they're starting to kind of try to get into the game business themselves, and they used to try to sell games on the Apple TV and stuff like that. So I think they have games maybe at the front of their minds and not at the back of their mind, as Nick said.
Yeah, seems fair. So Ben, you've been talking to people who are watching this trial, not in the way that Nick has been watching the trial, which is devastatingly sad and just involves sitting on the phone all day, but in the sense of there's clearly going to be some kind of knock-on effect from whatever this is, and it seems like there are a lot of people waiting in the wings to take action based on however this trial ends. What are you hearing? What happens sort of after the decision comes out, and what are people waiting for?
So some of the folks I spoke to were sort of in the antitrust enforcement community, people who are familiar with the course of the investigation against Apple that's going on at the Justice Department and by states attorneys general, and they were basically saying, we are really watching this market definition. We probably might have to go in with something kind of similar if we did sue. They might not, but if we did, and if we go in with a market definition that this judge has just knocked down, she heard 3 weeks of testimony and she says, look, I don't buy it. It's not necessarily that they would go into a court that's bound by her decision. They almost certainly wouldn't, actually. But that it has weight. It has PR value. It has a sort of it's sort of convincing that somebody said, well, wait a minute, I don't actually buy this for XYZ reasons. It's going to be heavily cited. It's going to be a really long decision, all of those things. And so they might have to reconfigure a little bit depending on what she says, and have to kind of avoid some of the things that she says don't work. So the government, the states, and the DOJ, they're kind of looking at this, hoping that the judge buys what Epic is selling. And then all the big tech platforms, Google is being sued, Facebook is being sued, Amazon's being sued. They all want to be able to say, look, we can control our platforms however we want. And that's what this, you talked about the PR battle, that's what this is ultimately about. There may be unhappy developers, but at the end of the day, as a matter of antitrust law, we are fine on that. And so they are watching and really hoping that the judge is buying what Apple is selling. So it's this huge inflection point, I think, actually, in these antitrust campaigns that we have just reached.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, in what, like a half hour before we started here, DC sued Amazon for antitrust stuff. So like this stuff is, it feels like we're going to accelerate one way or the other, but maybe the tactics are going to shift depending on what happens.
Absolutely. And that is based in district law, but it is ultimately a question about how they maintain their policies against third-party sellers. There is a lot of at least sort of theoretical high level overlap between those two things.
Yeah, I mean, you just like, you change, sellers to developers, and all the rules are the same. Like it's amazing how different these companies are and how identical all of their antitrust issues wind up turning.
You don't even have to change the word fees. You can just leave that.
Right. It just exactly right. So Nick, what about you? What are you seeing in the tech industry? I mean, obviously, I think you and I have both talked to a lot of developers who are watching what is happening here, and Spotify seems like one other big company that is surely paying a lot of attention to what's going on here. So what do the stakes feel like kind of in the next days and weeks as we get a decision here?
Yeah, I think the mobile gaming industry is going to be watching extremely closely. A lot of really, really big developers that make billions of dollars every year on the App Store, thinking that maybe we can get a cut, maybe we can reduce our cut that we have to give to Apple. I know that the tech industry, they might not want an alternative App Store on the iPhone. I don't think Spotify is necessarily interested in that, but they are interested in is bypassing the 30% cut. So I think companies like Spotify and Netflix. These are companies that have not let you sign up for their services on the iPhone for years now. You have to go to the web, and they're not even allowed to tell you how much it costs over there. They can't even tell you it's cheaper, more expensive, or the same. They just have to say, go sign up on Netflix.com. So
but they're not even allowed to say that. They're allowed to say, oh, you can't sign up here in the app.
They can't even give you a link. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're really constrained in that respect, and I think they're really looking at these anti-steering issues and thinking like that would be a big win for them, because they could go back on, they could put their signups back on iOS. So I think that there's a lot of different categories of companies looking for different things out of this. Obviously, Epic shot for the moon. They want all of it. They want alternative app stores, alternative payment systems. They want the iPhone to be an open platform. I'm not sure they're going to get that, but I think there's going to be a level of happiness they get from every one of the lower level effects that might come from a narrower decision.
Yeah, is there any reason to think that there might be some giant sweeping thing here in terms of kind of that initial thing that Epic asked for, which is basically to upend the entire idea of the iPhone? Because it seems like within the trial, it got away from that really quickly and drilled down much faster into the sort of in-app purchases stuff, which was the other side of this. And it seemed to me that, I don't know, there was this like tacit agreement on both sides that like, yeah, this big idea that you should be able to sideload apps on the iPhone and, do whatever you want, however you want, is sort of a non-starter. So let's have the fight about in-app purchases, which is an actually valuable one. But maybe I'm oversimplifying that.
If that happened, I think my head would explode. But I think I would be very surprised. It would be astonishing, but it would be interesting to see.
It would mean a lot more listening to trials for you. I would.
Oh yeah, appeals for decades, I'm sure.
Which we're going to get anyway, right? I mean, it seems like I can't imagine any possible outcome that doesn't lead to some kind of appeal, right?
That sounds right to me. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm penciling it in for whenever that's going to be.
Yeah, fair enough. Corinne, what do you make of this like, I don't know, the sort of the rest of the tech industry's take on this? Because I feel like one of the things we learned about Apple is that Apple is desperate to get people to make in-app purchases and has sort of intentionally like reined in more control over the App Store over time. I don't know. I get the sense that Apple continues to feel like it can do whatever it wants. Like, do you see any of that changing here for Apple?
I don't see any of that changing here. I think that Apple can kind of do whatever it wants. I think if nobody's going to bail on the iPhone. And I think that was the point. Like, they can raise their fees, they can change all their rules. And like, if developers just stop developing for the iPhone, then they will make zero money. So I don't think that anything will really change for Apple. I don't think that Epic will win, their moonshot of defining everything, or, blowing up the whole iOS ecosystem. I think that even with smaller changes, I still don't, or even if they win, smaller bits and pieces of the trial, like I don't think much will change for Apple, and not least because I'm sure they'll, because of the decades of appeals, they'll probably figure out, ways to work around it that they'll still get some sort of 30%, cut one way or the other. So I don't think that things will change too drastically.
Yeah, that's fair. Wait, and this is just occurring to me now, and I definitely should have asked this question a long time ago. What is happening with Google? Epic also sued Google a year ago. Why aren't we talking about Google? Are we going to have to do this all over again with new plaintiffs and new defendants at some point? What's going on?
What's weird about the Google thing is that if their whole argument with Apple is that they want them to be a more open ecosystem, like Android is an open ecosystem. So like, I don't know how it's going to, fit in with the same argument. Like, I'll be very curious to see like what their argument there is. Like, what is the, the market, and what are they doing over there? But I guess it would depend on what happens with this trial first.
Yeah, Ben, do you have any sense? Does anybody even care about the fact that Epic sued Google? Are we just over that one now?
Last I checked on the docket, they're still in a lot of pretrial motions and all of those kinds of things. So I guess it'll be a little while before we get there. But I think that's exactly right, that they'll have to Epic would kind of have to pivot on a dime and say, well, okay, now Google's the problem, and figure out how to make that work somehow. So.
Yeah.
Unless someone wants to settle.
The judge had a very similar question. She asked Epic's main lawyer during the closing arguments yesterday, you want to do just like Android, but you're also suing Google. He kind of maneuvered around it pretty deftly, saying, we're suing Google for different reasons around, the way they tie the Play Store services to the Android licensing agreement. But it sounds like it's going to be an even trickier, more nuanced case for Epic, potentially harder for them to make.
So people are going to have to play even more games of, is this a video game?
Oh, I hope not.
All right. Anything else?
Video game. That's my final.
No, Roblox is a set of experiences. It's not a video game. That's what I learned from this trial, is that Roblox is a digital experience.
Resembles.
Is that different than a metaverse, or is that the same? Is a metaverse just like more experiences?
I think the answer is both yes and no.
Perfect. Just what I wanted.
We'll ask Tim Sweeney next time we get a chance.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, anything else on y'all's mind that we should be talking about that you feel like is fascinating before we wrap up here? You all just want to go sleep. I understand. It's cool. It's been a long.
Just gonna go dial into the courtroom line and just listen to the white noise a little bit.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank all of you for being here. Thanks to everybody watching and listening. And inevitably, when appeals start, we will be back here doing this. So we'll see you then.
Thank you.
Thank you.